The ever-growing RWBYverse shows no signs of stopping. After some history lessons in the form of brief videos as well as short stories in the form of manga, some of which are canon until they decide, we don't want those to be canon anymore. After a few of those as well as a video game, Rooster Teeth finally recognized, hey, we introduced a whole lot of characters who did a whole lot of nothing. People actually seem interested in these characters who aren't a part of Team RWBY or Team Juniper. Maybe we should explore them and give them a story. And so they've dived into a whole new medium of storytelling they've yet to do. Books. All words, no pictures. As a first venture into a true canon spin-off, E.C. Myers was tasked with telling the story of Team Coffee, the second-year students of Beacon Academy we've seen a tad of, 1 year after the fall of Beacon, hence the name, After the Fall. This 295-page novel tells quite the story, perhaps one worthy of its own condensed summation for your viewing pleasure. But I'm not here to tell you the story and all about their adventures in Vacuo and this piece of meat that they ran into. I'm here to tell you what we learned about these characters, Semblances, backstory, and how it overall affects the RWBY storyline. To start things off, it seems like the appropriate place to fill in a gap the main series left for these characters. In Volume 2, we learned that Team Coffee was in charge of planning the school's dance, however, a mission pulled them away from it, thus leaving Team RWBY to pick up where they left off.
Team Coffee's away mission lasted longer than expected, so Weiss and I were asked to pick up where they left off.
The book does give more context to the whole situation as well as the planning and a debate as to whether or not to include a fog machine.
Your dance is gonna have fog machines?
We were thinking about it.
This isn't the important part, however. You see, the next time we saw Team Coffee was in the episode Field Trip. After the dance had ended, they had been gone for much longer than expected. Their return is quite somber, and the only thing we're given was Velvet's ominous statement about what happened.
Your mission was supposed to end a week ago. What happened?
Nothing happened. There were just so many.
She gives Team RWBY some words of encouragement before heading back into the school. So they were planning the dance, went on a mission, and returned sad. What happened? Well, amongst several of the flashbacks held within this book, this story is one of them. Chapter 11 is dedicated to this event. Coco had signed up for some optional missions being offered, and the task sounded fairly straightforward. The village of Lower CAIRN sent a distress call as they were under attack by Grimm. They were escaping but could use the protection to help them. Team Coffee was tasked with finding survivors and rescuing them by bringing them to Vale. Upon arrival, the village was gone, flattened to the extent where you would question if life had even inhabited the village in the first place, as there was hardly a village left standing. That didn't completely wipe away any and all hope, however. Survivors surely fled into the wilderness, and so they attempted to track them down and rescue them as planned. This goes on upwards of 10 days searching for survivors. Fox was insistent that he could use his semblance to track them down. He catches wind of some but can't pinpoint where they are exactly. Professor Port had faith in the students but said if he thought that they couldn't handle things, he would send an extraction team to rescue them. Anyway, Fox wasn't off when he thought that he sensed someone on the mountain path that they were currently on, and Velvet's hearing confirmed that. They hear a voice not on the mountain, but in the mountain. Several voices, in fact, 6 to be specific. It was the Gray family, the father Linus, his father Rhea, his son Leander, and his 3 daughters, Phoebe, Helen, and Cleo. So to rescue the family, they must go inside of the cave. However, it's a very narrow fit downward. Coco takes point and goes down herself while the rest must look for another entrance. It is also revealed here that Coco has a phobia of dark and enclosed spaces. I'll get to that backstory later. Despite her fear, she pushed past them well enough to help lead the family through the caves. She spots a light and believes it to be her team. That, combined with wanting to get out of the darkness as quickly as possible, leads her to hurry towards it. However, it's not her team as it winds up being a Deathstalker. Mesmerized by it, the father winds up pushing Coco out of the way, saving her life, but not without getting pierced in the leg by its tail, pinning him to the ground. Coco tries to use her gun, but can't continue, as if she did, the tunnel would collapse on them. So she tries using her handbag and staves off the Deathstalker just long enough for the rest of her team to have followed the noise of the gunshots to her location. Fox sliced off the Deathstalker's legs while Velvet attacked the tail. Yatsu got the stinger out of the father's legs and they all retreated out of the tunnel. Coco used her gun full blast this time, destroying the Deathstalker and collapsing the tunnel as well. Unfortunately, upon exiting the tunnel, they were surrounded by a ton of Ursai. All-out war ensues as the members of Team Coffee try their best to kill all of the Grimm that are swarming them. The family spot an opening at one point and run towards Coco for the protection, but the injury to the father's leg causes him to collapse. The mother went back for him as the kids were told to continue. 3 Ursa had chased the family and Coco managed to pick off 2 of them before her gun ran out of ammo. The 3rd Ursa got a hold of the father with its teeth and he screamed until he finally died and fell silent. The mother dropped to her knees while Velvet ends up killing the Ursa, saving her, and she and her kids retreat behind Coco and Velvet. Coco attempts to tell the family to run and find safety as she believed her team would be fine and could handle all of the Grimm without having to look out for anyone. That confidence didn't last very long as a Goliath had began approaching, shaking the ground with each step, and this time, Coco was scared. Also scared, the mother and her children ran back into the cave, which Coco tried to stop them from doing. She fired her gun at the Goliath, but nothing happened and she couldn't stop it. The Goliath slid down the slope and crushed the cave entrance as well as the mother and her kids. Shortly after, a bullhead arrives with Professor Port on board. Coco wants to stay and fight, but it isn't until Yatsuhashi picks her up by force and drags her onto the airship, where they finally acknowledge that they failed. And that leads back to the events of Beacon, the somber return Velvet statement.
There were just so many.
The story does carry on a little past that as well. Ozpin talks to Velvet and the rest of Team Coffee about what had transpired, while Ozpin does his Ozpin thing by giving a speech about teamwork and what have you about the greater good. A genuinely compelling story which does many things the main series doesn't, such as having the Grimm feel threatening, and with that comes death. They actually killed named individuals in front of our characters' faces, in kind of a brutal way to be honest. Granted, just introduced, but they had names. And our characters failed. It brought them down, but while it was a tragic defeat, at the end of the day, they came out of it a better and stronger team. I think this story was a standout and I didn't mind telling it because it isn't a part of the main narrative of the book. Well, how about them individually? As stated during the story, Coco has a phobia of dark and enclosed spaces. She had developed this fear when she was a child. One day, her and her brothers, Mate and Toma, were playing a game of hide and seek. Coco decided to hide in a cabinet under the sink. After some time had passed, she decided to check on her brothers to see if something was up. Although when she tried to leave, the cabinet door wouldn't open. She screamed and banged her feet on the walls and pipes and whatever else was in there with her. Her father eventually found her after hearing the sound travel through the pipes down to his workshop. She had later learned that her brother Mate did in fact try to check under the sink, but the cabinet wouldn't open, so he gave up and thought Coco had run off in the middle of the game. Ever since, she's been afraid of dark, enclosed spaces. To go off on a slight tangent, the darkness and small spaces are one of, if not the only time Coco truly displays fear. Throughout the book, she's an incredibly confident character, cocky, some would say, all about putting on a good show. And so the events of the Vital Festival almost don't feel like her character at all. When Emerald messes with her mind creating Yatsuhashi's illusion, she starts to shake. Yet when the book goes into detail about how her and her team stayed at Beacon as long as possible, wiping out Grimm, facing what felt like an inevitable loss, it never gave the impression that she was truly scared. The darkness was really the only time Coco was described as shaking out of fear. So she's more so the attitude of Volume 2 Breach Coco, not Vital Festival shook Coco. So with all the new canon material, this is the most out of character moment she seems to have been. Fox was born and raised in Vacuo. One day when he was a kid, his village was fortunate enough to have gotten a rainstorm, a rare thing in Vacuo. His parents scrambled to use the rain to make mud bricks for their home. Fox wanted to help, but he was inexperienced and didn't know how, so his parents told him to go play while they worked on making mud bricks. Elsewhere, a young Fox wanted to prove them wrong, so he tried his hand at making the bricks, though they didn't go well. A large vibration then shook the settlement, and it turns out all of the rain had caused a sinkhole to form, swallowing half of the village, including Fox's parents. Fox wasn't too upset about this event. He grieved for a short period of time, but the people of Vacuo have come to terms with life and death, and it can be taken just like that. What Fox was most upset about was how random the event was. So he swore that he would move to a place where he could protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He wanted a fighting chance at life, not one that would be taken out of pure randomness. After the event, his uncle Copper, who wasn't much older than him, looked after him. He was the only person who didn't treat Fox as though he was a liability as a blind man. He taught him to fight. He ensured Fox know how to survive in vacuo, making sure he always looked out for himself. Copper would also describe things to Fox, how they looked, whispering them to him as Fox hated loud noises. He told him all about how all life was valuable, especially in vacuo since there's so little of it. Shortly after telling Fox that, he was killed by a man who wanted what he had. The man was killed himself by his tribe for his actions. The people of the Kenite tribe then took Fox in with open arms, and he stayed with them until he was old enough to attend Beacon Academy. Velvet isn't given any sort of true backstory. We know she's a Faunus and has been discriminated her entire life for it, but there's no events in the book detailing a defining moment. The only thing we know about her is that she had attended Pharos Academy, a primary combat school in Vale on the continent of Sanus. Coco also attended the same school. Yatsuhashi's backstory also acts as an unveiling of his semblance. When he was 8 years old, Yatsuhashi unlocked his semblance, accidentally making his dad forget that he gave him an allowance. Over time, Yatsu would attempt to figure out his semblance. He tried on multiple occasions to tell his parents about it, but they would always forget. He could make people forget things. It was easier with things people cared less about, but if a thought was more firm in the person's mind, it would only disappear for a short time. Yatsu used his semblance for years on very minor things, primarily as a way to get out of trouble. At some point down the road, his mother gave birth to Yatsuhashi's little sister, Hiyoko. Yatsu was jealous of the baby, getting all of the attention. When his mother told him to clean his room, which he didn't like to do, he decided to use his semblance on her so he could play instead. What happened, however, is Yatsuhashi made his own mother forget about her second child completely. She didn't recognize Hiyoko or recall ever giving birth to her. Yatsu panicked and during this time tried his best to take care of Hiyoko, hoping his mother's memory would return to her. The day would continue on, Yatsu playing with his sister until he would eventually pass out from exhaustion. He is later awoken by his mother, with her memories returned, not remembering that she had forgotten in the first place. Feeling guilty, Yatsu would try once more and telling his mom what happened, and she was frightened at first, but forgave him. He went on to tell his father and grandfather about it. His father was angry and scared, while his mother gave him words that he would live by to this day. She told him that he had to respect the minds of others, that by taking away their memories, he takes away their right to make their own choices. His grandfather went on to add that all people are is what they remember, and if Yatsu erased the wrong memory, he would erase their entire identity. So he was told not to use his semblance again until he learned how to control it. In modern day, Yatsu uses his semblance not to great effect, but to confuse an enemy by making them forget something in the moment so to get the upper hand. Going back to Velvet, we've always known what her semblance was, its muscle memory. While her camera duplicates whatever weapon she's taken a picture of, her muscle memory allows her to wield it to the extent that whoever she saw using it have. Fox, while I never elaborated in the story earlier, his semblance is telepathy. He can communicate with people using his mind and they with him. But for that to happen, he must establish a connection with them and keep it open. He uses this a lot, seemingly to prefer this method of communication. He only really talks when he has to or his aura is drained. As described in the story earlier, he can detect other minds within a certain distance. It's how he found the Grey family in the tunnels, and he uses this detection ability quite a lot throughout the novel. Something else we learned about Fox is his AI Ada. She's designed to help people with disabilities, seemingly best designed for blindness. She'll send pulses out and describe what she detects. She's fairly useful and can even describe someone's fighting style. Fox can get a general sense of the enemy's location with his semblance, but Ada helps paint a clearer picture. Coco's semblance remains an outlier amongst her team. Velvet uses her mind to copy movements. Yatsu uses his mind to erase memories. Fox uses his mind to communicate. But Coco's semblance doesn't use her mind at all. Her semblance simply allows her to increase the effectiveness and overall power of dust, supercharging it in a way. It's also why her gun is devastating. By the sounds and looks of it, she's never used it in any other way. It's always been for her gun. After the Fall delivers a lot of information about these characters, backstory, semblances, some gaps in the story, all while telling its own original narrative. Team Coffee has risen up as quite the group of interesting characters. Their dynamic works well, they've gone through a lot, and they have no plans of splitting up.